McCarthy Center for Public Policy and Civic Engagement. My name is Alex Ritchie. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a student coordinator here at the McCarthy Center. I just want to thank you all for making it out here today. It's good to see some familiar faces out there in the crowd, and I'm sure it'll be a great event. The McCarthy Center, for those of you who don't know, is a resource for students to use for collaborative projects and events which are also focused on public policy and civic engagement. The center also provides opportunities for internships in those related areas. So a couple of upcoming events to keep in mind. On March 22nd, we have Faith in Public Service. And then following that, we have a McCarthy residency with Kathleen Hall Jameson, which will include a student debate on the night of the 28th, as well as her lecture on the 29th, and a lunch and learn on the 30th. For more information on those events, you can visit our booth up here. Please feel free to talk to me or any of the other student workers and volunteers. We want to hear your events, ideas, and all those other good things. So, that's not why you guys are here. Our event today is titled The Tea Party Movement, a New Form of Civic Engagement. I'll turn it over to our intern director, Professor James Reed, who's a political science professor here, to further introduce the event and the panel. We'd like to welcome our two distinguished panel members, and just once again, thank you all for coming out here today.
Thank you, Alex. Welcome all of you to Politics in a Pint. Ordinarily, we would have somebody behind the bar to deliver the pint part. That part didn't work out, but I think we can still deliver politics. My name is Jim Reed. I'm a professor of political science and also the interim director of the McCarthy Center for Public Policy and Civic Engagement. I do want to strongly encourage people to attend at least some of the public events for Kathleen Hall Jameson's residency, March 28th through March 30th. There's going to be a student debate. The students are going to debate about the effect of the internet on politics. And Kathleen Hall Jameson's keynote address, which will be on Tuesday, March 29th, is titled, How the New Media Are Affecting Us and Our Politics. New media would mean things like the internet, social networking, talk radio, cable news, things other than traditional broadcast news. So that'll be very interesting. Kathleen Hall Jameson is a nationally known scholar on political communication. She also has roots in the St. Benedict's community. She went to the St. Benedict's prep school back and graduated in 1964. Well, the title of our panel today is The Tea Party Movement, a New Form of Civic Engagement, ? The Tea Party movement emerged recently, or at least the name emerged recently. Sometime after the 2008 election, that name started being used. But it draws on a very old tradition in American politics of opposition to what some Americans see as an overly powerful federal government, and opposition to the taxes that pay for that government's activities. In that sense, it's not new. I've studied the history of American political thought, and this resembles lots of things at different periods of American history. In case you don't know, the TTEA stands for Taxed Enough Already. The Tea Party is not a political party in the usual sense. It clearly worked energetically on behalf of many Republican candidates in the 2010 election, but it regards itself as independent, not as an arm of the Republican Party, and it has made clear that there's some members of the Republican Party it's going to oppose in the 2012 election. It has no central leadership or agreed upon national platform. Each affiliate within this movement goes its own way. But there's broad agreement on a number of things to which the various Tea Party groups are opposed. They seem to be united in their opposition to the health care reform law passed in 2008, what they described as Obamacare. They favor significant tax cuts and spending cuts and a major downsizing of government. Seem at the moment not averse to risking a government shutdown in order to force this downsizing of government. Our focus today, however, is not so much on its issue position. In the question and answer period, I think anything can come up. I think the reason why we did this panel is to look at the Tea Party movement as an organizing model, as a form of organizing, motivating, and connecting citizens. How does the Tea Party persuade people to join them? How do they connect with one another? what form of civic engagement do they exemplify? Remember that this is the Center for Public Policy and Civic Engagement. That's what we're interested in. Most studies of civic engagement have focused on forms of civic engagement that come from the left, like the civil rights movement of the 1960s or neighborhood organizing movements of that period, or that's forms of civic engagement that come from the center, sort of centrist community volunteer work. The Tea Party movement, if it is a form of civic engagement, is coming from a very different direction. And it would be interesting to examine what kind of civic engagement it is, how its ways of motivating and connecting with citizens compare with left-wing and centrist versions of civic engagement. I want to read out the definition of civic engagement first, and then go to some things from the Tea Party website. This definition of civic engagement comes from the American Democracy Project. Quote, civic engagement means working to make a difference in the civic life of our communities and developing the combination of knowledge, skills, values, and motivation to make that difference. It means promoting the quality of life in a community through both political and non-political processes. So at least that definition of civic engagement is open with regard to which direction on the political spectrum you're coming from. Another definition of civic engagement coming from the Coalition for Civic Engagement and Leadership, University of Maryland. Civic engagement is acting upon a heightened sense of responsibility to one's communities. This includes a wide range of activities, including developing civic sensitivity, participation in building civil society and benefiting the common good. It talks about behaving and working through controversy with civility, participating actively in public life, public problem solving. Okay, so that's some definitions of civic engagement. With that in mind, I'd like to turn to some of the things from the Tea Party website, keeping in mind that there's no single one group that speaks for all of them. From the group called Tea Party Patriots, which has a website that you can easily find, teapartypatriots.org. This is its description of what it understands the Tea Party to be. It says, quote, we the people wake up and say enough to out-of-control government spending, taxation, regulation, bailouts, takeovers, and the ongoing erosion of our liberties. You have built this movement. You are the ones that lead it. You are the ones pressuring our elected officials to make the tough decisions that must be made to save our nation. You are the Tea Party leaders. So clearly this website treats the Tea Party leadership as being ordinary citizens. In that sense, it's similar to kinds of civic engagement language that you will find elsewhere. I also found, in terms of the organizing model, helpful hints and a to-do list for starting a Tea Party. So you can get a whole list of things if you're interested in the organizing model. Pick an event, April 15th, because it's tax day. There's an obvious day to have an event if you're connected with the Tea Party. Make sure there's an internet connection for streaming live feeds. Play patriotic tunes and patriotic music and have a pledge of allegiance at events. Hand out local Tea Party literature with instructions for people who want to get involved. Find out if any conservative talk show hosts will hold a Tea Party call-in show. Call into the local conservative talk show program to promote the event. So radio talk show is clearly an important part of Tea Party's organizational model. So with this in mind, I have some questions that might help focus our discussion of the Tea Party. The two panelists don't have to, they can ignore my questions if you want, and talk about whatever you prepared, but in case you find them interesting, some of the questions that I had. One is the Tea Party movement, is this a response to particular events and issues from a particular couple of election years that will fade over time, or do you think it will stay around? That's the first question. Second, as a form of civic engagement, how broadly or narrowly does the Tea Party movement reach out to others? Does it seek mostly to rally and connect with those with whom it already agrees? or does it attempt to engage with those with whom it did not yet agree? In civic engagement terms, often civic engagements in the definitions I've read out are looking at bridging to people from different backgrounds with different points of view. Does the Tea Party movement do that? If so, how? And second, finally, civic engagement typically refers to some sort of community building. Does the Tea Party movement seek to build a community in its activities? And if so, what kind of community does it seek to build? So with that, I will turn, our panelists are Dan Croft, talk show host and political commentator from WLS AM 890 in Chicago, and Claire Haig, associate professor of political science. Claire teaches American politics, is also researched and is writing on the Tea Party in comparison with other neo-populist movements, similar types of movements in Australia, New Zealand, Canada. With that, I will turn this over to Dan Croft.
Thank you. Well, just there's a lot there in the introduction. Just a couple kind of points of order maybe we can discuss a little bit later. I wouldn't subscribe to the notion that the civil rights movement was a leftist movement. In fact, for those of you who don't remember, more Republicans voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 than Democrats. And I also wouldn't subscribe to comparing the Tea, or to characterizing the Tea Party as a neo-populist movement in the modern definition of populism, which is a pejorative that essentially means homogenous people allied against perceived elites and dangerous others. Populism, as it's attributed to the Tea Party, is very similar to the characterization that was made recently by NPR executives, the CEO of whom resigned today for such statements. Let me go to the initial question, the title of the forum. The Tea Party, is it a new form of civic engagement? And my answer to that would be no. I don't think it's a new form of civic engagement. I think it's a recommitment to civic engagement. But I would hasten to add that I think it's a more sophisticated form of civic engagement than we've previously seen. There's a few reasons for that, a couple of which the professor pointed out in his opening. One, it's leaderless. This is not a movement that is about some self-indulgent billionaire, like Ross Perot, or a particular single-issue group, like a Ralph Nader. It is people that have come together, and this is also kind of goes to your question, why it's sustainable. It's people that have come together over the last 2 years after Rick Santelli's screech that was heard around the world on the floor of the Mercantile Exchange in Chicago, to say we have been hurt over the last several years in a way that we haven't been hurt before. Financially, our quality of life, the kind of future we think our children may have in this country. And because we have been hurt, or when people get hurt, what they have a tendency to do is pick their heads up a little bit and look around and start saying, what the heck is going on around here? Wait, I'm sorry, you're spending how much for what? Wait, that guy makes how much money to do what? So when people start asking questions, as they did start asking questions after the 2008 election cycle, and they don't like the answers they're getting in return, some folks, to the extent they got the answers at all, some folks took it upon themselves to say that, we're not going to stand idly by and allow government, not just the federal government, but government at all levels to continue doing what it's doing. Because number one, it's not sustainable, and number two, it is negatively impacting my quality of life. And I don't see politicians from either party standing up for my interests, so it's time that we hold people to a post-partisan standard, if you will, of representing my interests. And to me, that's, I think, what you fundamentally have to understand the Tea Party is. And this is why it differs from the People's Party, with, the agrarian populist movements of the late 19th century in this country, and most of the other movements, even in comparative political systems. Because it is not single issue. It is not about one person's political ambitions. Is it about electing people to Congress or electing a president? Yes. But those names have not been pre-selected. It is not predetermined. It is a free market, if you will, consistent with Tea Party that advocates largely a free market capitalist system in terms of our economics. So you have to understand, I think, that really where it springs from is this larger overarching concern that the relationship between the citizen and his or her government is completely out of whack. It's not just about immigration. It's not just about taxes. It's not just about spending. It's about the entire proportional relationship between the government and the citizen, and the need to recalibrate that balance of power so that government's interests are aligned with the producers in our country, as opposed to the wealth extractors and the tax eaters. And that's really fundamental to it because it informs the particular policy prescriptions and the particular the particular terms of debate and engagement on the full range of issues within our popular political discourse. The other thing I will say, in terms of why I would say that it is more sophisticated than previous movements and qualitatively different, is because it's realpolitik. It is not putting up candidates, as the professor mentioned, under the Tea Party banner. It is seeking to use the two-party infrastructure that exists, and rather than reinvent the wheel, will win the game with the rules that have been set up, as it did, to many people's surprise, in primary after primary last cycle. I mean, there was a time where I didn't think a Mitch McConnell-backed Senate candidate was ever going to win a primary. Now, that doesn't mean all the Republican nominees ended up winning, but a lot of them did. A lot of them did. And so it is taking that infrastructure and saying, we're going to hold people to a standard, and we're going to bring as many resources to bear or more than the establishment political party if the establishment candidate is somebody that we cannot discern the difference between that person and the putative opposition. And the other thing that the Tea Party understands, and this goes a little bit to the community building question, politics is not about achieving unanimity. Politics is a fight. It is a fight. It's something the Republican Party forgot, and that's why they lost Congress in 2006. But if you don't believe that politics is a fight, then you haven't been watching the news over the last 3 weeks with protests in Madison and Michigan and Florida and Ohio and everywhere else, where all of a sudden, when the public sector union's meal ticket is on the chopping block, well, they're totally hell with it, and we're not going to take it anymore. And you have teachers, educators in Wisconsin holding up signs that say, first they came for the teachers, which, for those of you who don't know, is a reference to Martin Niemöller, the Lutheran pastor who issued an anti-Nazi directive back during the days of the Third Reich, essentially saying, first they came for the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't stand up. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I wasn't a trade unionist, so I didn't stand up. To compare asking you to pay 5% of your salary for your guaranteed pension and a little bit more for your health care coverage to the Third Reich, is that proportional? Is that a responsible rhetoric? So it shows you that when somebody's ox is being gored, they don't like it. And the Tea Party recognizes that it's a fight, and it's about drawing battle lines, not a fight in a violent sense, a fight in a rhetorical sense. That's what politics is. Competing visions for how the world, how society should be ordered, what values should be reflected in our government and our laws. And that's what the Tea Party understands. So I think there's this caricature of the Tea Party as, knuckle dragging, mouth breathers, toting their guns around, and not stringing two sentences together. And then there's the reality of what the movement actually looks like on the ground from state to state. And it's beyond just individual candidates. For example, tomorrow night, I'm moderating a debate in suburban Chicago about a high school bond issue referendum. And that's being sponsored by a Tea Party organization. And guess what? The school superintendent and the administration aren't too excited about it. But that's civic engagement that is issue-based, that extends beyond any singular election, that transcends any single candidate. And to me, that is a fundamental picture and a more accurate reflection of what the Tea Party truly is than this over-extrapolation from the anecdotal that you see on MSNBC.
Claire?
Yeah, that was very broad, but I will try to sort of respond a little bit. First of all, I think you did partially define populism, but because it's a little more complicated than that, I just like to go back to my sources and give you a definition of what I think neopopulism is. First of all, I think, I'm just going to read. Populism in modern democratic society is best seen as an appeal to the people against both the established structure of power and the dominant ideas and values of the society. This structural feature in turn dictates populism's characteristic legitimating framework, political style, and mood. So I define populism a little differently, and and therefore I do see the Tea Party as classically populist in function and feature, and it does have some characteristics that are very similar to neo-populist movements throughout the English-speaking world, and actually in other developed nations as well. I think some of the things you actually talked about do actually make it that. There's two differences that you talked about that are very interesting, but I'll do the similarities first. So the recognition that neither party or neither existing party or no existing party is helpful. And I think that's very clear when you look at neo-populist movements in other countries. There's a recognition that the existing structures aren't helpful for the people. So that's a classic one. The relationship between government and citizen is out of whack. Again, another common feature and another rhetorical feature that you see in throughout the English-speaking world and in Western Europe as well. That's a recognition. This is why these movements exist. Immigration is an issue with neo-populist movements in general. Taxing and spending is an issue with neo-populist movements in general. And the thing that made me excited was you said your term was wealth extractors and the tax eaters. So a valoration or a movement that values the producers of our society versus the wealth extractors and the tax eaters, which I love. And that's classic neo-populism. That's beautiful. Actually, all of the neo-populist movements actually move back towards saying, the people who actually produce things in our society, the farmers was the original one. Farmers, they're really the heart and soul of the society. We should go back to that. The hardworking core. That's the essential rhetorical appeal of populist movements. So that's beautiful. And then there's a couple of different things. Oh, other interesting stuff. There's two things that you said which I think are good points. The leaderlessness, because many other neo-populist movements do have this sort of charismatic thing going on, so there's always a charismatic leader. And I think for populist movements don't need a leader, but populist parties do. So that's a very interesting part of where we get neo-populism from. Is neo-populist party emergence requires leadership. And then the other thing, which is really essential, is the taxes and spending. So why do we have neo-populism emerge? Well, it's always in a time of crisis. You don't get neo-populist movements emerge unless there's major recession going on. And so where there's economic problems, there's more likely to be neo-populist emergence, and then these sort of social movements. Here's a sort of more structured version of what I would say neo-populist movements are. The movement defines its base of support extremely broadly and rejects notions that and I would say that many are quite broad, implying that a specific collectivity of people can act politically in harmony despite potentially significant internal problems, and that political dialogue undertaken between leaders and led within the movement must be couched in terms of a subset of the ideas of the indigenous popular culture. Okay, I'll translate that for you. So the call is always to existing rhetoric within the culture, and so in Australia, the neo-populist movement was always couched in terms of equality and mateship. There's nothing more Australian than mateship, and that's what they were pulling from, this notion that we're all in this together, and you have to cut down the tall poppies because they're all the non-producers, and we have the common sense when we know how to deal with this. We're little Aussie battlers, is the whole. We're the little Aussie battlers, and we're going to make it. But you can hear this sort of we are ordinary people, and we're solid and we're sensible, and we reject the wealth extractors and the tax eaters. You can hear that in American rhetoric as well, but you can also hear other things. The call to, well, think about it. Where are they calling to? What rhetoric are they calling on? Liberty. It's all the founding ideas. So you have to call on the founding ideas, and I can see that in this movement, which is very exciting. And the other sort of commonality that I see is the central to the movement's ideology must be the evocation of a network of concentrated political or economic institutions allegedly wielding unwarranted power. And as a corollary, the movement's goal is wide disbursement of that power to the people. So that's essentially what all these movements are actually looking for. And I've been looking at Glenn Beck YouTube videos the past week or two, and it's clear he's using some of the very same rhetoric. He's even talking about trilateral commission. All the movements talk about this sort of conspiracy theory stuff. And so, although there's no central leader, there are mouthpieces for the movement, or who claim to be part of the movement, who are doing these same sort of things that the movement's leaders of the parties are in other countries. So, very interesting point. And what do I think? I'll answer the first question. Is it a response to a particular set of events? Yes, very much so. It's a response to a particular set of events that makes people's worries more real. And so, if you have a job and everything's going well, you're not going to freak out very much. If you lose your job and everybody else seems to too, if things seem to be turning down, as in a recession, especially in a big recession, you are going to respond in this way. And that's when you see these waves of populism coming up. It's always a response to some sort of financial crisis that makes your life seem better. So, yeah. And then they go away again. That's the other. Yeah.
Well, so based on that definition, I'm not sure what isn't the neo-populist movement. Because John Edwards' To America rhetoric,
Definitely. Yeah, yeah.
Barack Obama's, special interests, right?
Yeah.
So the rhetoric that you see that's emblematic of some of the conversation in the Tea Party is, of course, replete through both both of the major political parties as well. So this is where I get the sense that it seems like but because Glenn Beck wants to talk about the Trilateral Commission, as we discussed, since you can see to the point that it's leaderless, Glenn Beck is by definition not the leader. Because some people, again, over-extrapolation from the anecdotal, which is a problematic tendency of those who try and understand the Tea Party movement, somebody shows up to an event and is dressed like Sam Adams, that's reflective of everybody who's a Tea Party member. Glenn Beck wants to talk about the Trilateral Commission and the Rockefellers. Well, that's emblematic of everybody in the Tea Party movement's a black helicopter conspiracy theorist. Not true. I don't particularly subscribe to Glenn Beck. And a lot of other people don't either. So, that's what I'm saying. I mean, this is to me, this neo-populist moniker is a construct, and you're looking to fit the Tea Party into this construct because, to some extent, the term populist has pejorative connotations these days, as I described, and particularly as you relate it back to some of the examples you used, like Australia and Pauline Hanson. That was a nationalist party. It was anti-immigration. That was its main focus, as you described. The same thing of some of the other countries I know you've studied, Canada, New Zealand. It's the same thing. And of course, those movements very easily distinguished from the Tea Party movements because they did have leaders, because their agenda was very narrow.
I disagree that it was narrow.
Well, because it was about unifying the country. I mean, the name of the Australian was One Nation. What I just described the Tea Party is, well, we're not one nation. It's not about one nation. It's about battle lines, and we have to choose a path for this nation. That is an important distinction that your comments don't take into account.
let me try to draw together some thread. By the way, I have nothing against Sam Adams, either the historical character or the beer. The more the better. It seems to me that there's one of the lines of disagreement of your perceptions is whether this is a leaderless or not leaderless movement. And clearly there are people who want who claim the role of being a leader of the Tea Party, including Michelle Bachmann, the congresswoman from the district that we're in right now, sees herself as a Tea Party leader, Glenn Beck. So his name has been mentioned, so I think that's at least a point of disagreement about whether there are particularly prominent leaders or whether that's taking something out of context. Second thing that I'd like to follow up on is the part more about what is meant by the wealth extractors, kind of from the line. Because Claire also agreed that
tax eaters.
The producers versus wealth extractors and tax eaters. So how do they understand from a Tea Party, when a Tea Party person uses a producer, wealth extractor, or tax eater, what particular kinds of people do they have in mind there? What would be the image of the tax eater versus the producer? And then a third thing that there's something else there that I forgot what it is, so I'll come back to that later.
Well, a couple things. I mean, just in terms of the leaderlessness nature of the Tea Party, and Glenn Beck's a leader, and Michelle Bachmann's a leader. She's part of the Tea Party caucus and the House Republican caucus. And but then, Herman Cain wins the Tea Party Patriots straw poll in Arizona 2 weeks ago, and Sarah Palin is out there, and so are a whole host of other people that either want to ally with the Tea Party or certainly want to rely on their manpower and passion and policy focus. So again, for every name that you can provide that people will know as a putative Tea Party leader, I'll give you 1,000 that you don't know that aren't. And all the little groups around states like Illinois that I know particularly well, but really across the country. I mean, it's just these people, as you said, operate independently, and that kind of spontaneous order is by definition leaderless. It's very much like the market economy. Millions of people operating, pursuing their own self-interest, unbeknownst to somebody else pursuing their own self-interest, and it somehow works because it's rooted in cooperation and persuasion, not coercion. The second part of your question, tell me again, I'm sorry, the second.
That part of the analysis of society and politics is that there are producers and
what are producers and tax eaters?
And tax eaters and wealth extractors.
Well, I mean, look, here's the thing. So this is really becoming a public sector versus private sector dichotomy. When last year the federal government spent $31,000 per American family, it took in $18,000 in taxes and repeated per American family, repeated that 150 million times. You don't need a PhD in math to understand that those numbers don't work. And so what folks started looking at is, okay, well, we're spending a lot of money. Where is this money being spent? And part of it, you look at personnel, because the number one expense of any organization, and particularly any unit of government, is personnel costs. So you have to look at the people. What does the growth in government personnel look like in the bureaucracy? How much are we paying for it? And what you find is that once upon a time in this nation, at the state and the local, state, and federal level, you took public sector employment, made a little bit less money in exchange for job security and good benefits. That was the deal. Today, you have public sector employment where you make more than your private sector counterparts before you even get to the job security and the benefits. USA Today did a study last year that found that looked at 130 some odd job classifications that exist in the public sector and the private sector, and found that 8 out of 10, 80% of those job classifications, the federal employee, this was federal jobs, made more than their private sector counterpart before you got to the guaranteed pension, before you got to the Cadillac healthcare plans. And so people look at this and say, I am getting beaten about the head and neck area. I am barely making my mortgage payment. My property value is going down, my property taxes are going up. And then on top of it, I'm financing people that I don't know what they do, and they make some multiple of what I make. That leads to a certain level of frustration, and it leads to questions being asked. And what you find is that the government growth at every level has outpaced its utility. And what people on the other side see that just get bills in the mail is I get bills in the mail, the bills come with bigger and bigger numbers, and I am not seeing any commensurate increase in the amount of services or benefits I'm getting for the amount of increased money I'm having to shell out. And so that becomes very troublesome for a lot of people. I'll give you one quick anecdote, and it's just an anecdote. But it's a microcosm of the larger issue. And Illinois is the worst example from where I hail, right? We have the largest unfunded public pension liability in the nation at north of $90 billion. In the city of Joliet, which is about a 150,000 person town, blue collar town, always has been. You may remember the Blues Brothers hail from Joliet, fictional of course, but the average household income, $48,000. Average city employee salary, $83,500. When you include the guaranteed pension and healthcare benefits for city employees, the average Joliet city worker costs Joliet taxpayers $125,000 a year. So you have folks making $48,000 a year financing guaranteed benefit levels of $125,000 a year. Not only is that unfair, it's unsustainable, which is why Joliet is ranked as one of the 16 cities in the country most likely to go bankrupt. It's got a $27 million operating deficit this coming fiscal year. People look at that and they say, I hear a lot, and you've heard it over the last 3 weeks, and with all the public sector union protests, I hear a lot about working families when they're members of the public sector union. What about the working families in the private sector? What about, in the state of Minnesota, 456,000 business owners, less than 5 employees? Are those small business owners and employees of small businesses, are those working families too? Or do you have to be a member of SEIU to be a working family? That is the frustration. And it's not just kind of some unhinged frustration because things aren't going well for me. It's a frustration rooted in arithmetic that doesn't work and benefit levels that are disproportionate to the services being provided.
So just for classification purposes, all public sector employees are in the tax extraction.
No.
Can they also be producers?
No, this is, and I'm glad you brought that up, because this is an important distinction. This idea that somebody is against teachers, or somebody is categorically against public sector workers, this is just not true. What we're saying is that you don't get a blank check. You don't get to live a life without risk. Nobody gets that. Nobody gets to live a life without risk, and nobody gets a blank check. And so what we're saying is these salary and benefit levels need to be recalibrated to what the private sector can afford. It is not government living within its means, because government has no means. It is government living within the means of the private sector producers who finance both their own households as well as public sector largesse. And it's about recalibrating that to something that we can afford and that is equitable.
Okay, I think this would probably be a good time to start going to audience and listening.
Sure.
We have a microphone, so it can be directed to your question, which should be a question. Should be directed to anyone on the panel. Whoever it's directed to, the others can join in if they choose to. So.
I was hoping you could clarify a little bit. Is this on? I'm sure you can hear me just fine. I was hoping you could clarify a little bit on what you determined to be the cause, and I'm speaking to Dan specifically on the issues in Wisconsin, because you, if I understood you correctly, you said it's because we're asking them to contribute more to their retirement and things like that, whereas if my sources are correct, the issue there is that the governor wants to not only do that, but do something further and curb the collective bargaining right, which is what is causing most of these issues. So I would certainly hope you could clarify that. That's point number one.
Okay.
And point number two, I don't know what evidence you use or where you get it from. And from what I see with people on both sides of the argument, people tend to go with the numbers when they support their argument. And I just read a report from the Economic Policy Institute that actually shows that when you control all other factors, I think they did a regression analysis, public employees in Minnesota, this institute has done state by state, earn less than private sector employees by about 11%. And although they have better benefits than private sector employees make more in terms of cash and salary. So how does that jive with what you do?
Well, two things. Let me take your second question first. I don't know specifically to Minnesota, but if that's true in Minnesota, I think it would be one of the very few states in the nation that is the case. And by the way, 11% pay differential in straight salary. So at the end of the day, public sector employees are still making more in salary and benefits are very real. If it's 11%, I mean, healthcare costs an employer 25% of base salary.
The study included benefits.
Well,
It's
if you want to look at studies that become more, again, I don't know Minnesota, but as I mentioned, USA Today did one at the federal level. Competitive Enterprise Institute did one for California. You're right in terms of competing studies that draw different conclusions, but there is a lot of scholarship to suggest that the public sector, private sector differential is decidedly in favor of the public sector. By the way, I'd be interested in that study too. There is a premium for not being able to lose your job. So for example, during the recession, during the 24-month recession we had, the unemployment rate among public sector workers was 3%. Among private sector workers, about 7.9%. There's a premium associated with secure employment. So I just say that without knowing the study that you refer to specifically. In terms of Wisconsin, you're right. You raise a good point. But remember, the protests started before they conceded on the financial terms. Right? The protests and the drum beating and the hysteria proceeded before the public sector unions came back and said, and the abdication of 14 Senate Democrats to our lovely state, where we're a sanctuary for liberal Democrats, that proceeded before they conceded on the terms. Now, does Scott Walker also want to constrict collective bargaining rights? Yes, he does. He wants to constrict collective bargaining rights so that public sector employees would not be able to collectively bargain for health care or benefits, health care pension, and that their wages would be tied to CPI. Yeah, that's right. Oh, by the way, half the country doesn't have unfettered collective bargaining rights for public sector unions, by the way. So this is not something where Wisconsin is doing something that has never heretofore been seen in the Republic. Secondly, the larger issue of public sector versus private sector and why there's a difference between public sector unions and trade unions, a difference, by the way, that FDR recognized in his opposition to public sector unionization, a difference that George Meany, one of the founders of the AFL-CIO, recognized in his opposition to public sector unionization, is that there is no true negotiation going on. It is a scam because the public sector unions are on both sides of the deal. SEIU asked me, the teachers unions, finance the campaigns of people who get elected, and then they sit across the negotiating table from them. You're on both sides of the deal. How can that be a true adversarial process by which you hammer out an agreement that involves consideration on both sides, like happens in the private sector, and like happens with management and labor with respect to private sector trade unions? That is a qualitative difference, and that's why politicians have been able to kick the can down the road for generations saying, hey, why not? We'll give you 12% over 3 years. We'll sweeten the pot with your pensions and your health care. Because, look, I know these numbers are going to not be sustainable at some point, but I'm going to be out of office by then. I just want your political support now. So it's very easy for politicians to be, and Republicans and Democrats, it's very, very easy for them to make the expedient decision based on their short-term political interest, because long-term, you're on the hook for the financial encumbrances that come along with badly negotiated deals. And that is an important distinction when you talk about unionization. This is not anti-union even. It is recognizing that the public sector union negotiating kabuki theater is just that. And that's why we have these unfunded liabilities.
Can I ask you a question? Coming back to the Tea Party movement, would you say that this the issues raised by the conflict in Wisconsin and similar conflicts in other states, is that a defining issue for the Tea Party right now?
It is, because it's essentially standing up to the folks that control our government in a very meaningful way. And it's also getting back to what we said before about recalibrating the power relationship between the state and the citizen, and between the taxpayer and the financial burdens you're placing on that taxpayer. So it absolutely is a defining moment. And guess what? The other thing that's nice about this whole discussion that we're having is everybody understands it. Everybody understands Milwaukee teachers making $100 grand before you get to benefits. And that's not what I'm making. And what's happening in the Milwaukee public school system. They're not necessarily churning out the great poets and noblemen and magistrates for generations to come. So something is fundamentally wrong. The other thing I would add, though, too, in terms of more constructive than just reactive by the Tea Party, is the Tea Party movement is also behind system change ideas. Right? The left always wants to talk about immigration and try to marginalize the Tea Party as some kind of xenophobic movement, which it's not. But they're the organization, they're the people that are behind movements like school choice, right? And who's against that? Who's against introducing competition in the K-12 system? Teachers unions. So the movement is broader and more textured. The policy debates extend beyond just a few issues that the left wants to talk about to try and pigeonhole the Tea Party as just this narrow entity that's having a temper tantrum about one issue or another.
Okay, I'd just like to point out that the Tea Party may have absorbed the issue of school choice, but it's not as though the Tea Party invented school choice.
No, actually,
issue because it was around long before that.
That's not what I said. No, in fact, I'll be specific then to further inform your point. Milton Friedman talked about school choice in 1955 when he wrote Capitalism and Freedom. So I'm very well aware of the origins of the school choice movement and that policy proposal. What I'm saying is that who is advocating for competition in these monopoly urban school systems that don't work and relegate hundreds of thousands, in fact millions of mostly minority children to second-class citizen status because they're never even afforded the opportunity to learn the critical thinking skills, reading and math that they are required to be successful in the global digital world in which we live. It's not the public sector unions. It's not the teachers union. It's even liberals mugged by reality like Davis Guggenheim.
No question. Where's the microphone?
It's out of batteries.
Okay, so
So you're really gonna have to speak up.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I just had a question, and this was actually something that Jim raised that I wanted to come back to. But could you talk about how the Tea Party is maybe reaching out to an oppositional audience? And so, because that seems like it was something that Jim talked about as a feature of civic engagement, like creating a conversation. And yet, I guess maybe my concern is that it sounds like, I guess maybe if you could just clarify how that's happening, because it seems like the Tea Party is reaching out maybe just to one audience. And maybe if you could explain how they're actually expanding their audience and creating civic engagement.
Everybody get the question?
Well, I mean, the question is curious to me, frankly. I mean, I kind of reject the premise. It's like saying, how are the Chicago Bears reaching out to the Minnesota Vikings? They're not. They're reaching out to like-minded individuals, regardless of their particular characteristics. So regardless of race, gender, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, on and on and on, because it's about what's going on between your ears. It's not about your skin color or any other non-behavioral characteristic. So they're reaching out based on intellectual commonality. And that happens through, not just thankfully through social media and technology, but also through the civic organizations and the world in which the individual Tea Party members live. So their church, their Lions Club, the Knights of Columbus, their book club, whatever it may be. But of course, I mean, they're reaching out to socialists as much as socialists are reaching out to the Tea Party.
Can I just address that too? And some forms of civic engagement are what we think of as bridging capital, yes. But I don't necessarily think that all forms of civic engagement need to be reaching out. And so I take your point, but I would also say there's some participation that's going on that is an encouraging thing. So I know you don't like Glenn Beck as the leader of the movement, but I would say that these rallies are actually forms of participation. And actually, one of the points that Jim raised, that like who is it, evangelizing and who is it evangelizing to, who's involved in the movement, and it's clearly a particular, not gun-toting, none of these things, knuckle dragging, I think is your words, but definitely an older and more educated set of individuals. So yes, not bridging between groups, which is what we hope as civic engagement, but a bonding. You already mentioned Knights of Columbus, so you know exactly how old these people are. Knights of Columbus, that sort of bonding capital that is, the older people and who are raised, issues of concern are there. I'm not convinced by your argument that they're interested in education. I think that's an issue that some people might be interested in, but then they're certainly interested in unions, but I see nothing in the Tea Party that they're not really interested in education. They're interested in the producer issue, they're interested in taxes, they're deeply concerned about Social Security and Medicare, but
Well, I must be going to the wrong meetings then.
Right, totally.
But because the Tea Party meetings that I go to and the conversations I have with Tea Party organizers, we actually moved a bill in Illinois trying to get school choice, a limited pilot program, school choice program in the city of Chicago with the help actually of the Democrat African-American state senator, but it was the Tea Party that provided a lot of the muscle in terms of trying to enlighten some of our less enlightened Republicans in the Illinois General Assembly. So again, anecdotal, but what you have is essentially the conservative base of what used to be the Republican Party, or who used to call themselves the Republican Party, and those are the ideological leaders of the school choice movement. It happened since Friedman introduced the idea a half-century ago, as I mentioned. Well, sorry, I mean, I'll leave it there. But one other thing I'll say in terms of the larger issues too, what's going on in terms of the conversation. I mean, you go to a little Tea Party meeting with Tea Party meeting with 30 people, and they're talking about the debt ceiling. I mean, that's significant civic engagement. And yeah, they may skew a little bit older, but guess what? Older people in this country have more skin in the game than somebody who's 20. So until you're paying a mortgage, until you're looking at retirement, until you're looking at the kind of life your children may have, you don't have as much skin in the game, so maybe you're not as hyper-motivated as somebody that is over 40. And there's nothing wrong with that, especially in a country that is getting older with every passing day.
Just a quick poll here. Raise your hand if you know what the debt ceiling is. Okay. Raise your hand if you know what happens if the debt ceiling is not raised. Okay.
You should go to a Tea Party.
Go ahead.
I had a question for kind of both of you. As a very active Republican in the entire state of Minnesota, I've noticed from the 2008 elections to the 2010 elections, it seemed like the people that were most involved with the Tea Party were frustrated libertarians who were pushing for Ron Paul during that election cycle. Is the Tea Party kind of a way of the frustrated libertarians within the right side trying to make their voices be heard? And maybe you could both.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Ron Paul, end the Fed, audit the Fed, and other iterations of the kind of Ron Paul the Ron Paul iteration of libertarian philosophy is definitely present. I mean, outside of the winning straw polls, though, I'm not sure how much bandwidth they have, as evidenced by Ron Paul's performance in the Republican primary 4 years ago. So, I mean, this is, like I said, it's a collection of people that have different points of emphasis, but generally have a very similar view on that overarching issue, that power relationship between government and citizen. And so, I understand you don't want to have endless conversations about ending the Fed any more than I do, but there's still a legitimate part of a movement that seeks a lot of the very same policy change.
I don't want to keep everyone in suspense, so the debt ceiling is what you have to raise to prevent the federal government from shutting down. Just wanted to let you know what that was about. There was a hand in the back. And go ahead.
Actually,
Okay. Other questions? Yes.
Claire, in your talk, you talked about how these
Steve, can you stand up and because we don't.
Claire, in your talk, you said how the neo-populist movements eventually go away, or you said they always will. So, what kind of changes would have to take place before that would happen to the Tea Party? No, not like I mean, like what results.
He doesn't want the moon to go away. It's okay. That's not what he's asking. Okay, I shouldn't say go. They rise and fall. We talk about the waves of populism, and it's a social movement. So yeah, there's no movement in the same way as I'm going back to the civil rights movement here. And I will say that that's a legitimate, legitimate parallel. And there's portions of the civil rights movement that are disparate, right? So yeah, there's a libertarian wing of the Tea Party, and the Tea Party isn't a one-part Tea Party. It's multiple. It's very factionalized. It's a movement, not a party. Once you have a party, you have to have a platform. You have to stand for actual policies. If you're just a movement, you can just walk, like redressing the balance between the people and the government, right? And the government. Yes, it's going to go away, but it's always there. It's always going to come back. And what will make it go away? Probably fixing the economy. No one's worried when everybody's employed. You can't be bothered.
Yeah, well, so it'll be here for a while, fixing the
Yeah.
economy.
So I'm not particularly worried about it going away anytime soon. I think I have plenty of time to study.
Yeah, I mean, two of the points though too that I think it's important for the Tea Party members to understand, which they've exhibited to this point. One is that policy is more important than pedigree, and nowhere was that more clear than in the Christine O'Donnell Mike Castle primary, right? Basically, the electorate said, I don't care if you're a Harvard guy, I don't care if you've won 18 elections in a row. If you're going to go to Washington, D.C. and vote against my interests, then I'll take my chances with the witch, right? So, but the idea that policy is more important than personality or pedigree is a powerful idea, and it's one that had been lost for a while, particularly in Republican circles, which has been, the Republican Party to its detriment, has been very much a wait-your-turn party, not just at the presidential level. It's been very successionist in its operation, to its detriment. And then the other thing, and you see this now playing out by these continuing conversations on esoteric issues like the debt ceiling, which is that elections are means to policy end. Yay, we won an election, Republicans got control of Congress, now we can quit. No. Now we're going to make sure that the people we elected abide the same standards as the people we rejected, who are they're next to go or to be challenged. And you're going to see that next year, as was mentioned, with probably Dick Lugar in Indiana getting a primary challenge, Orrin Hatch in Utah getting a challenge. John Ensign in Nevada already is not going to run again in large measure because he was roundly rejected, in that case also by the establishment. So the policy over pedigree and elections as means to policy ends are two important kind of first principles of the Tea Party movement.
Go ahead.
I don't doubt that the Tea Party movement has is it addressing education and things like that, but without a particular platform, how do you separate the Tea Party movement from being a group that either addresses education or on the opposition side does all those crazy things that get them the bad media? Like without a platform, how can we differentiate between one side and the other?
Well, right. I mean, I think it's a challenge, and I think also, no two Tea Parties were created equally. So, I mean, it's not just the difference between the Tea Parties in Illinois and Minnesota. It's particular counties in Illinois, particular regions in Illinois versus particular counties and regions in Minnesota and the rest of the country. So, I mean, it's interesting. It's kind of like, it's interesting what Scott Brown had to say, the senator from Massachusetts, right? Running for re-election. He's getting a lot of heat from Tea Party activists because he's, moved considerably to the center and taken some votes that they're not particularly enthralled with. Me neither. But I like him better than Kennedy. And so, so he's been put to the question because the Tea Party was perceived as being very instrumental in his election over Martha Coakley 2 years ago. And he said, look, I'm a Republican first. The Tea Party helped me. A lot of people helped me get elected. And I think that the understanding, and the Tea Party needs to show some humility here too, the understanding that it's about advancing the flag. And the old Truman line that it's amazing what can be accomplished when nobody worries about who gets credit. needs to be part of the code of the Tea Party as well, with regards to elections as well as policy initiatives. And so I don't think I can give you a definitive statement about the Tea Party and its involvement or how it does it nationally, because you have all these microorganisms all over the fruited plains that are operating differently.
So we probably have time for maybe one more question here. If anyone wants to, yes, can you stand up, please?
I guess the recent events in Wisconsin and now Ohio and Indiana, wherein certain members of the state legislatures who are Democrats flee the state to Illinois. And this has been happening, and I was just wondering what your take was on that and whether there was any sort of day of reckoning that has to happen, that's inevitable, that wherein these senators will either have to come back or whether they'll be able to have some sort of procedural motion where they'll be able to just override their absence.
Yeah, we're not liking the trade. We give our jobs in Indiana and Wisconsin, and we get their liberal Democrats. We're not. It's a kind of trade only the Cubs would make. But I mean, the day of reckoning is coming. I mean, what's the end game for the 14 senators who fled Wisconsin? I interviewed 3 Democrats last week on WLS, and I asked them all the same question. I mean, so basically, if Walker doesn't move off his position, your position is you can't do anything except never come back to Wisconsin. So is your position that you're never coming back to Wisconsin? Well, no, of course not. When are you coming back? Well, I don't know. Because they're waiting for the high sign from the public sector unions to say, okay, you did as best you could do. You're welcome to come back now. We'll just take our medicine. And that's essentially what's happening now. I mean, just in the last 24, 48 hours, you saw movement that they may be, under cover of night slinking back to Wisconsin from Rockford or wherever else they are in Illinois. The Indiana thing is interesting too. I mean, apparently, Mitch Daniels 5 years ago, Walker was taking a brunt of all this. Mitch Daniels 5 years ago, one of the first acts he did as governor when he was first elected was decertify the public sector unions. And, Indiana hasn't lapsed into a black hole. In fact, Indiana has attracted more foreign direct investment into their state in the last 3 years than any state in the country, which is an amazing thing for Indiana, particularly relative to Illinois, which has all kinds of natural advantages over Indiana. And Mitch Daniels seems to be doing quite well in a down economy as is Indiana, with per capita income on the rise. So this idea that the public sector unions, their well-being is inextricably linked to a state or a community's economic well-being is mythical. In fact, they're probably inversely proportional in large measure. But every state is different. So, for example, in Illinois or Ohio, Republicans or Democrats could have never left like that. It wouldn't have mattered because you don't need a supermajority for quorum. So they could have run those bills without the legislators that advocated. So this is where you have the Madisonian incubators of democracy and different rules and different methods of moving legislation. But again, all the focus is on Walker, but the national context is really important in terms of what the law of the land is in half the other states, as I said, with respect to collective bargaining, privileges, because they're not rights granted from God, they are statutory privileges for public sector unions, and also what is happening in Michigan today. There was 1,000 people in the Capitol. Michigan, it's Wisconsin, it's Indiana, it's Ohio, it's Florida. Rick Scott is moving in Florida to eliminate teacher tenure and to go to merit pay. So, I mean, this is a conversation that will be, and a fight, frankly, that will be visited upon every state in the nation. It just may come slower to states that have governors like Mark Dayton and Pat Quinn.
I have a quick answer that might get us back to Tea Party, which has not much to do with Wisconsin. But maybe it does, because there's some really interesting public opinion polling by a political scientist out of Madison. It's looking at, it's actually field research, fascinating methodology, looking at the opinion, how in-state and greater Wisconsin versus the 2 urban cores see what's happening in the unions. And it's us versus them. And that's really interesting because in many populist movements, it's rural. They're rural-based or rural heartland sort of based versus urban cosmopolitans. And so the support for the movement against these rich public sector unions, us versus them, you can see that in small town Wisconsin, in Greater Wisconsin, at much greater levels than you can see in urban Wisconsin. So actually, this is all back to, maybe it is back to the Tea Party. There is this divide, these sets of divides, and one of them is urban versus rural. Because if you live in, well, if you live in small town Minnesota, me, yeah, $55,000 is a lot of money, but maybe if you live in Milwaukee, it's not. So it does make a difference when the teacher's making $55,000. Well, that makes you solidly upper class in Sauk Center. It may not make you solidly upper class if you're living in the Twin Cities, right? So yeah, there's a dichotomy there that does relate, and that does make people, view things in a different way.
Okay, well, we are out of time. It's chilly in the room, but I think we've managed to raise the political temperature. Thank you for coming, and we'll have other politics in the Pint sessions and other McCarthy Center events. Stay tuned. Thank you very much.